So good evening, everyone, or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. So I'll be talking about ethics in Belgian game development curricula. This is a topic I worked on along with my esteemed colleagues Bruno Dupont and Bieke Zaman, and all of us from KU Leuven. I think at this point, I don't need to explain anymore what ethics are at this point in the conference. However, I will say that throughout their existence, games have seen debates over their contents, and some of these debates are decades old by now, others are newer. But what all of them have in common, basically, is that they are grounded in a concern over the negative effects or the impact of games on players. And so when ethics are discussed, they tend to focus on player experience after games hit the market, and less so about the game developers who make those experiences possible before they hit the market. Naturally, the human choices that shape game design are acknowledged in discussions on ethics in games. And so these have mostly focused on how game design may afford ethical experiences, or how developer values or intentions may be gleaned from by looking at specific design features. Concurrently, there is also initiatives such as ethicalgames.org to compile a code of ethics for the industry, including on topics such as the ones mentioned above. However, going back even further into a game dev's life, there's limited insight into how future developers, that is the game developers of tomorrow, in this case, game development students, are made aware to these guidelines, and broader, how they are made aware of the ethics of game creation and, for instance, the impact on players that their creations may have. In asking a question such as this, we also depart from two assumptions, being that negative impacts in games or effects may not always be intentional and may, in that case, potentially reflect a lack of awareness of this impact, and that awareness isn't a fixed characteristic and it can be raised. And that one of the most foundational sources, perhaps, for raising awareness may be schools. And so looking at previous work, it would seem that there is very little on ethics to be found in educational material for aspiring game devs. And the main challenges for incorporating ethics into curricular content seem to be that curricula are considered rigid, and that teachers may lack the experience or the knowledge to teach ethics, as well as the fact that education is primarily focused on turning graduates into future employees, and the role that ethics could play in this and how attractive ethical skills could be to future employers is doubted by some. And so similar challenges can then also be observed in similar fields such as computer science or programming. All of this brings us to the matter at hand, basically. What is nowadays taught to the video game devs of tomorrow in terms of ethics? And specifically, we wanted to know first how ethics are integrated in course content for game dev students. And second, how this content is shaped through the perspectives regarding employability, regarding the rigidity of curricula, of the people actually doing the teaching. And so important to mention in this regard is also that this study was conducted in Belgium. The game industry here is relatively small, especially compared to the global juggernauts, but it is growing, and there's been some policy to stimulate growth, as well as this one particular game quite a few people seem to like. But still the Belgian scene is faced with a bit of a brain drain challenge, in that graduates after graduating leave for other countries who have or that have a bigger industry and thus more job openings. So to address our research questions, we employed a mixed methods approach involving document analysis and interviews. We analyzed 11 higher education and vocational education and training programs for prospective game developers in Belgium, which in total amounted to 219 potentially relevant courses. Documents analyzed and included program descriptions such as this one, promotional blurbs, brochures, ECTS forms, teaching material, quality assessments, with key points of interest then being listed in an overview that we created. And this overview then allowed us to quickly identify courses that may be of relevance to the questions regarding ethics we were trying to answer. So for instance, a course such as career skills was more likely to contain relevant information than a course called applied math and physics, which we did double check, of course. Out of 219 courses, then 21 were deemed relevant as they either explicitly addressed ethics or touched upon issues that were associated with ethical concerns. Finally, also following the proposed Code of Ethics by ethicalgames.org and the topics it addresses, we distinguished ranking of coverage of ethical concerns in curricula. So while document analysis allowed us to examine the formal structuration of ethics in programs, it also had its limitations because you can also only work with the material that you are given. And so there may be a potential bias because of incomplete or inaccessible sources. In total, then, as a follow-up, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 8 educators and program coordinators from 5 institutions of the previous 11 that we had surveyed. And so these interviews not only contextualized the findings or even challenged the findings of our document analysis, but they also provided deeper insights into the personal perspectives of the teachers in ethics. And so at face value, among the courses we surveyed, only a small fraction explicitly address ethics. And instead, more often than not, in 16 courses to be precise, they touched upon issues associated with ethical concerns, such as, for instance, marketing, company values, diversity, and so on, as seen in the table. Words in italics in the table, by the way, are words that were found in close proximity to the issues discussed, such as reflection, awareness, entrepreneurship, and that, according to the people we interviewed, were associated with ethics. Finally, then, in terms of modality of teaching, lectures appear to be the most frequently employed method of teaching, followed closely by practicum-based classes. However, as remarked by one participant, the ideals of teaching through interactive methods may also have its limitations, particularly in groups with larger students or larger groups with students. And so among the courses we analyzed and through talking with the participants, we distinguished 3 major categories of ethical considerations. A first category then deals with content and design impact awareness by regarding games as a medium to be experienced by players first and foremost. And although not all courses deal with user experience to an equal measure, the majority did emphasize the artistic character and the well-considered experience intended to be delivered to the player. A second category then comprises entrepreneurial competencies, starting from the viewpoint more that games are industry products produced by either a team of employees or independent creators. And here we also see the integration of so-called soft people-focused skills, as one participant put it, that teach one how to play well in team, basically. Interestingly, while crunch was never explicitly mentioned as part of the document analysis, when asked about this category of courses, participants frequently mentioned crunch issues and how they related to this specific category of ethical considerations. Finally, then, a smaller category of courses viewed games as cultural artifacts and sort of explored the different perspective concerning communities surrounding these games, especially concerning minorities in game culture. So with regard to evaluations, and all participants but one showed a reluctance to evaluate students' work from what they felt overly normative standpoint. And so they believed in fostering open dialogue and discussions on ethical matters rather than imposing what they felt were predefined norms. A second salient theme then was doubts about the sincerity of the game industry in embracing ethically conscious employees and in actually promoting discussions on ethics in games. For instance, participants questioned whether industry demands align with ethical considerations to an equal degree. And by that, I mean, they thought that the industry or the future employer would be more interested in employees that know how to play well with others. Remember the second category of entrepreneurial competencies, rather than employees that are, for instance, very adept in self-critique or critique of how a game is monetized or designed, which would be the first category. And what's more, they felt that it may even lead to so-called ethics washing, according to some participants, where ethics were only used in a performative way, really, either to rectify a studio's public image or to dodge more strict regulation by governments. Finally, then, teachers showed readiness to address topical issues in the industry, for instance, on particular business models or sexism among employees during the Blizzard controversy, as they were addressed by students or partners. And the way these were covered also sometimes went beyond the confines of the curriculum. So for instance, by organizing a live stream series, an off-campus event, or the formulation of their own school's community guidelines. And so together, all in all, we see ethics in game developer education as composed of two mutually shaping dynamics. First is ethics as localized content, and second is ethics as a transversal perspective. And so on the left, on the content side of the figure, ethics content is localized, meaning that it is sort of encapsulated in very specific course boundaries, and more often than not translated to conform to already existing courses or to methods, teaching methods that teachers were familiar with. And as evidenced in our interviews, this is also heavily dependent on the institution's agenda and stakeholder demands, which sort of acts as an external force beyond the teacher's influence. We also find that this encapsulated character of courses also means that some students may never be exposed to ethical contents at all, basically, as a fair bit of the courses we analyzed were optional or not included in every major. And so this also makes it seem that ethics are more relevant to some professions or some roles in the industry over others. And this is also especially striking because from a policy point of view, there have been mandatory assessments in Flanders which advocate for more consideration of ethical and social aspects for all students. On the right side of the figure, then, a transversal perspective, rather, implies that educational actors' perspectives sort of transcend the boundaries of any one specific course. And so first there was this reluctance to evaluate, which we think may be attributed to the lack of pedagogical training among some participants or their unfamiliarity with ethical theories and frameworks, because, for instance, there was only one participant who actually had a background in ethics. Doubts about the industry's commitment then were counterbalanced at the same time by sort of a sincere belief on behalf of many participants that teaching ethics can also lead to meaningful change in sort of a grassroots bottom-up way by empowering students to challenge industry practices and sort of have these outputs on the industry through education. So to close off, although examining game developer education in what is admittedly also a small country such as Belgium, it is our hope that our findings can inspire further research in other countries and that reasonable, actionable recommendations can also be made, which also hopefully can be extrapolated beyond just the boundaries of Belgium too. For further steps, we are currently drafting concrete and actionable pieces of advice, among which the following ones, such as proper pedagogical and didactical training for teachers of ethics-related matters, particularly when it comes to evaluation. Curriculum-wise reflection on ethics in courses, first to balance between the localized and the reflection strands, but second also to make sure that students are confronted with ethics regardless of their elective classes. A third option could be the integration of ethics as part of the immersion in the professional work context, so via a preparation or the follow-up to a traineeship, for instance. And then finally, the constitution of a more specific body of didactical literature on ethics in game design that could sort of function as building blocks for teachers to work with and to make sure that all aspects of ethics in games are addressed in education. But having that said, that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be in chat to answer questions. You can also reach out to me, and also feel free to check out our project page, the Gameable project, of which this study is but one part of. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Martin. I was checking the Q&A. We don't have a question for you quite yet, but sometimes it takes a little while for people to ask their question. So if you have a question for Martin, feel free to ask it now. You can also raise your hand. Same thing among the panelists. If you have a question, we have like 2 minutes left, so we can definitely at least take one question. Oh, I see there's something in the Q&A moving. So regarding a question from Solip. Regarding game ethic course, are there any indicators on the influence of protective gamer attitude among lecturers and students? So like lecturers or students refuse or concerned to raise the negative critical views on game.
Yeah, I think if I understood it correctly, Solip, so you're asking whether they sometimes didn't want to address these issues to not reinforce particular debates. I hope that's correct. But yeah, so I think from my knowledge, I couldn't see it. I think it was mostly the case that they felt that some topics didn't fit within existing courses as they were. And so I think the fact that they address some of these topics, and for instance, dark patterns would be one. There were participants who were sort of bewildered at the fact that they felt that students couldn't really recognize dark patterns, and they were sort of surprised by this. Okay, great, yeah. So I'm answering right. But so they integrated these topics beyond the curriculum because because there wasn't any place for it in the existing curriculum. And I think this is also what it sort of makes it a cycle in a way, is that in time, and we have seen this one course where these live stream series were in turn integrated into the curricular content. And so I think it attributes to sort of the diversity of topics and also the engagement of teachers to react to these issues which were raised in sort of a very ready, reactive manner. But I think but more probably institutional support and is needed to really make these very or to translate these into really tangible learning outcomes and course objectives and so on. I think that's, or I hope that sort of answers your question if I got it right.
Thank you so much, Martin. You can always follow up in the Q&A section,
Yes,
but we're gonna have to move on. Thank you again so much for your talk.